Not this year. Several Republican members of Congress and senators, egged on by President Trump and his false claims of electoral fraud in this election, are going to object to the slates of electors from several states, we don't know exactly how many, and try to force votes on those slates of electors. Mike Pence, as President of the Senate, will be in the chair right there next to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Under the Constitution, his job is to simply open up the envelopes and count the votes. That will be put to the test today because President Trump, again, baselessly trying to argue that Vice President Mike Pence has the power to somehow block these electoral votes. We want to get some things clear at the outset right now. Nothing that happens here today is going to change the outcome of this election. Joe Biden won the election. He won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College, 306 electoral votes. Those results have been certified in every single state after counts and recounts. President Trump and his allies have filed more than 60 lawsuits in federal and state courts. All but one of them have been dismissed as we see the senators come in, and even the president's own attorney general has said there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Mary Bruce covers Capitol Hill for us every single day. And Mary, even the senators and House members objecting today aren't offering evidence of widespread fraud.
No, they're not. And of course, neither is President Trump's team. You know, throughout the last 2 months, this entire fight, they have failed repeatedly to put forth any credible evidence to back up these claims of widespread voter fraud. It's why you have seen in state after state the president's legal challenges failing. In fact, we saw earlier this week the top election official in Georgia, a Republican, systematically go through all of the president's claims and knock them down one by one. So it's not really clear what these Republicans are after today. Some of them are going to call for a commission to further investigate these allegations. But what is clear is that what you are about to see will not change the outcome of this election. Joe Biden is going to be the next president, but it is going to be a performance intended for the president by those loyal to him. You are going to see more than a dozen Republican senators, more than 100 House Republicans all object to these results to try and please the president and show their loyalty to him.
Political performance art, that is true. And Cecilia Vega, our senior White House correspondent, the president, as this joint session is being convened, out on the ellipse in Washington, D.C., trying to rally a crowd of supporters with more of these false claims.
It is a remarkable split screen that is happening, George, and I came from the White House earlier this morning, and I will tell you so many of those supporters that I passed are not out there wearing masks, so the COVID umbrella is hanging over this remarkable screen as well. But the president has been speaking for over an hour now, and we have heard from him repeat baseless conspiracy theories that we've heard from the very beginning of him, these falsehoods about a rigged election, line after line about accusations that have been repeatedly tossed out in courts around this country over the last few weeks. He is threatening to, quote, primary the hell out of Republicans who do not join on this bandwagon today there on Capitol Hill. And he has asked those supporters who were gathered outside the White House to follow him to go down to the Hill there, George.
This is being called into session right now. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Let us remind that each side, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, each have 11 members allowed to be present on the floor. Others may be in the gallery. This is at the guidance of the attending physician and the sergeants at arms. The gentleman on the Republican side of the aisle will please observe the social distancing and agree to what we have 11 members on each side so that we can responsibilities
John,
to this chamber, to this
as the speaker is talking about the COVID guidelines. Vice President Mike Pence will open up these envelopes. The president has been pressing him to act. He's put out a statement just moments ago making it clear he will not.
You can share with your staff if you want to have a few more. But you cannot.
Mike Pence saying that he's looked carefully at this argument, frankly, a rather absurd argument that the vice president, in his role as the presiding officer, would have the unilateral power to overturn the election results. Pence says he's looked at this and that he just does not believe that is in keeping with the Constitution. He says that the presidency under our system of government belongs to the people. Very strong letter, complete defiance of the President of the United States.
The Vice President will as President of the Senate, gavel
Madam Speaker, members of
this
Congress,
session into order.
Pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the two houses have taken their places at the clerk's desk. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with the reading of the formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Mr. Blunt.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Again, they're going to be talking about these COVID regulations. I want to bring in Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst. Dan, we saw the vice president carrying out his constitutional duties right there. Explain what the Constitution says about Congress's role and the vice president's role.
Right. So there are two things happening here, right? There are going to be the objections from senators and House of Representatives members, and then there's the question about the vice president. With regard to the senators and the 100-plus Republican members of Congress, they have every right to object. You could say they have no reason to, that you could say that there's no valid claim here, but we've seen it in the past where there's been an objection, and that's really just theater. They know it's not going to have any impact.
Right, but let me just
because
press
they
you
don't have the numbers,
on that one point. On that point, that there have been objections in the past, but in all those cases, the candidate on whose behalf they were objecting had already conceded and was not pushing this.
That's true, but in terms of the proceeding we're seeing, right, strictly in terms of the proceeding, to say that they shouldn't be allowed to object, yeah, they're allowed to do this. That's a very separate question from the impact. And with regard to the vice president certainly, we now know, has no power to overturn the election.
Let's listen in. It's Roy Blunt, senator from Missouri, Republican senator from Missouri. States will go in alphabetical order. We expect the first objection to be to the slate from the state of Arizona, which, of course, Joe Biden won in a close election.
Are you ready? Let's get order, gentlemen. Want me to read it whether they can hear it or not?
They think it's working, so try again.
Mr. President, order in the chamber. Mr. President, the gentleman will continue.
The certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none, this certificate from Arizona, the parliamentarians advised me, is the only certificate of vote that the state purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware received 11 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for vice president.
First state that has been called for Joe Biden.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona. First objection.
And signed by a senator.
Yes, it is.
It is.
It has to be signed by a senator as well. You see Ted Cruz rising there. Now the objections has been filed. Both houses will go debate these objections.
And signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law. Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The two houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
So there will now be 2 hours of debate in the separate chambers. The House will take over the House chamber. Senate will take over the Senate chamber. As we said, this is the first of what are likely to be several objections today. We also expect objections to the state of Georgia, the state of Pennsylvania, perhaps some others as well. I want to bring in Terry Moran, our chief national correspondent, for more on this. What an extraordinary display across Washington, D.C. today.
It really is. And what we're watching right now is something we haven't seen before. We've had contested elections. This is one based on nothing. It's based on conspiracy theories, Facebook posts, and the vanity of the current president of the United States. This case has been looked at by scores of courts. These votes have been certified by each of the 50 sovereign states, as we are hearing Vice President Pence saying there are no other electors recognized by the state of Arizona having been sent to Washington. It's been affirmed in those courts against charges of fraud by Trump-appointed judges who invited his lawyers to provide evidence in court where evidence has to be real, and they were unable to do so. What we are seeing is a fit of pique on the part of the president, supported by his party. His party paid for it, it seems, in Georgia last night, and one wonders, you know, what kind of costs going forward we'll see. But I don't think the country's seen anything like this. I've covered elections around the world, and you know what we would call this if we saw it in Belarus or Paraguay or something. That's probably an insult to Paraguay, but we know we would call it some kind of attempted coup, an extra-constitutional effort to hold on to power. We would call that a failing democracy. I think the democracy will hold today, but let's not kid ourselves. This is skin-of-the-teeth stuff. It's a few thousand votes here, a few thousand votes here. The corruption of a public official who fortunately taped the phone call so you could hear what the president was asking. Fellas, give me 11,780 votes. It is skin-of-our-teeth stuff that we're going to get through this, as it seems, over the next day or two.
Thank you, Tara. And there are protests in the streets today led by President Trump, who has now said that he's going to lead a walk to the Capitol. Rachel Scott, there among the protesters in Washington.
George, at the foot of the Capitol here, chants of "Stop the Steal" behind me. You can see thousands of people gathered here. These are the president's supporters. I've talked to many of them here today. They say they have one hope: for the vice president to reject the will of the voters. That is simply something that Pence said he is not going to do. He's going to uphold his constitutional oath here. But these are people that support the president. They do not believe that Biden won this election, and this has so many in the Republican Party concerned, because this is what we are seeing right now, is the fracture within the GOP party. Part of the reason why leaders say if the president would have encouraged his base more to get out to the polls, to instead stop pushing these false claims of a rigged election, the results may have been different in a state like Georgia. But instead, Republicans, it looks like they may now have lost control of the Senate, George.
That's right. Of course, Raphael Warnock won his Senate seat in Georgia yesterday. It appears that Jon Ossoff, the other Democrat in the special election, is leading right now and is also likely to win. I want to go to Martha Raddatz, also on the ellipse among the protesters.
George, we are right in the thick of these Trump protesters. All of them are leaving. I am right on Constitution Avenue. We've been here all morning. There are people from across the country. They flew here. They drove here from Kentucky, from Texas, from Indiana, from Pennsylvania. They are here to support President Trump. And there is nothing you can say to them to convince them that Donald Trump did not win the election. You can talk to them about the Constitution. They will throw it right back at you. But it has been a largely very peaceful crowd. It is like a giant Trump rally. There are a number of veterans here. They say they're here upholding the Constitution. You could say the election is certified. You can say every state has certified the election. Talk about what's going on in Capitol Hill today. But they are standing by Donald Trump. They say they are here supporting the Constitution. And this is what Joe Biden is going to have to deal with when he is inaugurated on January 20th. This is not going away. There's nothing to convince these people that Donald Trump lost.
Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. Let me bring in Chris Christie for more on this. Longtime friend of President Trump, who has been saying, okay, I'm sorry, I'm afraid he's not with us right now. Let me bring in Rahm Emanuel instead. Martha Raddatz was just making the point that this is going to be Joe Biden's issue to deal with now. It appears that he is going to have a Democratic Senate, but it is true he won by more than 7 million votes, but the President Trump appears to have a rock-solid hold on this small core of his base.
Yeah, George, the way I look at it, yes, it's incumbent upon Joe Biden to lead in that effort, but we're all citizens, and it's also incumbent upon all of us. I think that I would make one comment. The Republicans are now paying a price for their Faustian bargain with Donald Trump. They lost an election in Georgia. 2 of them they should not have lost. They lost a congressional seat there, a presidential, 2 Senate seats. But they've also lost legitimacy as this happens. And you can see that happening, and now they have what I think is a holy war within the Republican Party between different factions, and that Donald Trump is brought to the doorstep of the Republican Party. But I also think, citizenship is not just about voting, it's about engagement. And I do think that it's incumbent, the president-elect has to lead us all, but this effort of reweaving America back together again. There's things we can do as a vis-a-vis national service, things we can do as a sense of education and opportunity and economic, that everybody has a seat at the table. And while this sits at, you're the president of the United States, so the crown is heavy for you, but all of us have a role to try to bring back this country and play a role in, once again, I think, having a sense of patriotism and pride. But what the president's doing, that was evident 4 years ago. The Republicans went along with it for 4 years, and now, yes, we have a broken country in many ways, but we also have a unique opportunity when it's broken to reset it and make it stronger. And I think the president-elect has to lead, but all of us have a role to play in that effort. And one question when I say this, not just about Washington, I look at this and I say, what would make people be in this desperate a situation that they would literally question the legitimacy of the political process, that they would be susceptible to that argument when it's self-evident from the courts, the judges, the election, the state legislatures, etc. And to me, that's part of understanding their desperation and then some way reweaving it back together and bringing them into the fold from this period of estrangement and alienation.
Rahm Emanuel, thanks. Sarah Fagan, that is one strain of the Republican Party, but you've got the Senate leader now, the Senate leader Mitch McConnell, perhaps after all the votes are counted in Georgia, he will not be the Senate leader anymore, leading the effort against these objections. This has split Republicans in the Senate and the House right down the middle.
It really has, and I think there's a lot of us, myself included, who come on TV and defend Donald Trump's policies for the country. I think he's done some good things, but this is not good. This is not appropriate. It's frankly very, very damaging. I do think there's a winner today. That winner is the Constitution of the United States. And every Republican who has gotten on television and stood on a chamber and talked about constructionist judges and the importance of honoring the Constitution when we select judges has no right to stand here and try to block the counting of these electors, in my view. I think I understand the politics of it very well. Politics is driving this behavior. It is not a moral argument. It is pure politics, but it's wrong, and I think the Constitution is going to win today.
Sarah, let me press you on that, because one of the extraordinary things happening today is that President Trump has actually been attacking his own nominees to the Supreme Court, who Republicans in the Senate worked so hard to confirm over the last 4 years. And two of the senators leading this fight on the objections are Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley, both served as Supreme Court clerks.
Right. Yeah, and I think, look, there's probably no better constitutionalist than Ted Cruz in terms of understanding it. He also is very political, and he has political ambitions. And he knows the politics of this. And anybody who puts their name on a ballot in the Republican Party today contends with a very, very strong Trump base. I think it remains yet to be seen sort of what the long-term impact of this is. We're at the most intense period of Trumpism right here, right now. He's going out in a very ugly manner. He will stick around, but there are other people like my former boss, President Bush, who are going to be there on Inauguration Day supporting the president-elect. You've got other people like Senator Tom Cotton, who have also very strong political ambitions, who are standing up and saying, that this is not appropriate. It's not in the Constitution. There's no evidence to overturn these electors. And perhaps the biggest winner today is going to be Mike Pence. I think he's going to face real political hardship in the short term, but he's clearly doing the right thing. He's honoring his constitutional responsibility. And I think over the long term, that is going to serve him very, very well. It's certainly going to serve him well with an important part of the Republican base, and I think he's gained the respect of some Democrats in the way he's handled this whole situation.
Thank you, Sarah. John Carl, that may be the clearest sign that the Trump era is actually coming to an end, that Mike Pence finally broke with him, even on something as clear as this. As we see the president, out there on the Capitol today, out there on the ellipse today, 14 days left in his presidency. What is the end game?
Well, it's striking looking at these pictures, George, of these Trump supporters, and there are hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. It's not a massive crowd, but it's a big crowd. And they're carrying flags. You see some American flags there, but in the sea of people, you see primarily a sea of those blue Trump flags. This is, in some ways, a political cult of one person, of Donald Trump. Above the conservative principles that have driven the Republican Party. This is about Trump and preserving Trump. And Mike Pence. I don't think you can find a single human being who has been more loyal, or at least more publicly loyal, to Donald Trump. If you think about all that has transpired over the past 4.5 years, beginning with Pence's coming on the ticket as his running mate, he's been beside him. He was beside him when the Access Hollywood tape broke. Didn't criticize, not a word of criticism uttered there. He was beside him during Charlottesville. He stood by him during the separation of children at the border. He stood by him during this coronavirus pandemic. Never even a hint, never a whiff of any criticism from Mike Pence of Donald Trump. And now you come to this final moment where Mike Pence really has absolutely no choice if he's going to abide by the law, if he's going to abide by the Constitution, but to preside and to count the votes and not to try unilaterally to overturn a presidential election. And for standing up and doing what he must do according to the Constitution, he is now incurring the wrath of the man that he has stood by for every moment of these past 4.5 years.
Yeah, John, he did face him directly yesterday in their lunch and tell him this is how it was going to go down.
He sure did. He told him directly, and that was not the first time, George. Pence has, by the vice president, has made it clear for several days since this issue has been percolating that he believes that he did not have the power to unilaterally elect electoral votes. It seems like an obvious point, but Pence had made this clear, and the reason why I know that is I've spoken to several people over the past week who have been in direct contact with the president, who've spoken with the president, and the president has expressed anger and frustration at Pence. He has lashed out to others, complaining that Mike Pence was not going to be with him in this final moment. This day, there's been a lot of talk of the perhaps upwards of 100 members of the House that will object. We saw 60 object to the Arizona electoral count, to the 13 senators that have signed on to that effort. But in this final week, Trump has been focused entirely on Pence. He has told people that it is up to Pence to save his presidency. He knows that these objections by the congressmen and the senators are not going to pass, but he has clung to this belief that Pence can unilaterally overturn the results of this election, that his loyal lieutenant can ensure that he has another 4 years in the White House. He has clung to that, and he has known that Pence did not believe he had that power. So then you had the statement that came out last night that, frankly, was a lie. The statement from the president that said that the reports that Pence, as we reported, that Pence had told him he could not do this were untrue, were fake news, and that he and Pence were in total agreement that he had the power to turn back electoral votes. Well, now we see definitively that obviously was not true with this rather lengthy letter that Pence has released today, and we'll see with his action over the course of his actions over the course of the next several hours. But really an extraordinary break and a coda to the Trump era, I believe.
Extraordinary break and an extraordinary presidency. Surprisingly strange that the president can continue to believe this, if indeed he does believe it. Meantime, I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, because, Pierre, we're learning the Capitol Police are evacuating some House office buildings now as these protests continue.
That's right, George. A couple of buildings are being evacuated. We're still sorting it out. We believe it's due to the protests. George, this is obviously a very tense day, largely peaceful so far, but law enforcement officials have been concerned about some of the fringe groups that are here in addition to the typical Trump supporter that has come to support the president. One of the leaders of the group Proud Boys was arrested on Monday as he came into the city. He was charged with helping to deface and burn a Black Lives Matter flag that was flowing on a church, African-American church in the city in a previous Trump rally. So right now, law enforcement, along with the D.C. National Guard, is all over the city trying to make sure that everything stays in order. But again, we do have information that a couple of buildings are being evacuated. We're pursuing additional detail, but it appears to be because of concerns due to the protests.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. I want to go to the Senate floor right now because current Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is now speaking on the Senate floor. Let's listen in.
Up to 5 minutes of that time to any senator seeking recognition. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the senators be permitted to insert statements into the record.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
We're debating a step that has never been taken in American history. Whether Congress should overrule the voters and overturn a presidential election. I've served 36 years in the Senate. This will be the most important vote I've ever cast. President Trump claims the election was stolen. The assertions range from specific local allegations to constitutional arguments to sweeping conspiracy theories. I supported the president's right to use the legal system. Dozens of lawsuits received hearings in courtrooms all across our country. But over and over, the courts rejected these claims, including all-star judges whom the president himself has nominated. Every election, we know, features some illegality and irregularity, and of course, that's unacceptable. I support strong state-led voting reforms. Last year's bizarre pandemic procedures must not become the new norm. But my colleagues, nothing before us proves illegality anywhere near the massive scale that would have tipped the entire election. Nor can public doubt alone justify a radical break when the doubt itself was incited without any evidence. The Constitution gives us here in Congress a limited role. We cannot simply declare ourselves a national board of elections on steroids. The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever. This election actually was not unusually close. Just in recent history, 1976, 2000, and 2004 were all closer than this one. The Electoral College margin is almost identical to what it was in 2016. If this election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral. We'd never see the whole nation accept an election again. Every 4 years would be a scramble for power at any cost. the Electoral College, which most of us on this side have been defending for years, would cease to exist, leaving many of our states with no real say at all in choosing a president. The effects would go even beyond the elections themselves. Self-government, my colleagues, requires a shared commitment to the truth and a shared respect for the ground rules of our system. We cannot keep drifting apart into two separate tribes with a separate set of facts and separate realities, with nothing in common except our hostility towards each other and mistrust for the few national institutions that we all still share. Every time in the last 30 years that Democrats have lost a presidential race, they've tried a challenge just like this. After 2000, after 2004, after 2016. After 2004, a senator joined and forced the same debate. And believe it or not, Democrats like Harry Reid, Dick Durbin, and Hillary Clinton praised them and applauded the stunt. Republicans condemned those baseless efforts back then. And we just spent 4 years condemning Democrats' shameful attacks on the validity of President Trump's own election. So look, there can be no double standard. The media that is outraged today spent 4 years aiding and abetting Democrats' attacks on our institutions after they lost. But we must not imitate and escalate what we repudiate. Our duty is to govern for the public good. The United States Senate has a higher calling than an endless spiral of partisan vengeance. Congress will either override the voters, overrule them, the voters, the states, and the courts for the first time ever, or honor the people's decision. Will either guarantee Democrats' delegitimizing efforts after 2016 become a permanent new routine for both sides, or declare that our nation deserves a lot better than this. We'll either hasten down a poisonous path where only the winners of election actually accept the results, or show we can still muster the patriotic courage that our forebears showed not only in victory but in defeat. The framers built the Senate to stop short-term passions from boiling over and melting the foundations of our republic. So I believe protecting our constitutional order requires respecting the limits of our own power. It would be unfair and wrong to disenfranchise American voters and overrule the courts and the states on this extraordinarily thin basis. And I will not pretend such a vote would be a harmless protest gesture while relying on others to do the right thing. I will vote to respect the people's decision and defend our system of government as we know it.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, right there giving the speech of his life before casting what he calls the most important vote he will ever make. For 4 years, he stood by President Trump's side. They were united by a common agenda: Supreme Court justices, tax cuts, Republican policies, He stood by silently as the president had abuses of power, inflammatory action, but he spoke out today on behalf of the American democracy, taking on President Trump's arguments about the election one by one, saying nothing comes close to rising to the widespread fraud that could tip this election, calling them mere allegations, saying if the Senate were to accept this, they would be sending America into a death spiral. Mary Bruce, hard to overstate what a remarkable moment that was for Mitch McConnell, given his actions over the last 4 years. And of course, it comes just hours after he has learned, almost certainly, he will no longer be the Senate Republican leader.
George, just incredible. And as someone who has followed very closely the relationship between President Trump and Mitch McConnell, to see him there take to the floor and cleanly break with President Trump after treading so carefully their relationship over these last several years, you really can't understate what a remarkable moment that is, and what a huge, huge moment of real historic significance for the Senate and also for Mitch McConnell personally and politically. To have him come out there and make it very clear there is no evidence of widespread fraud, saying there is no doubt here who won, and making it clear that it's not Congress's role to overturn the will of the voters. You heard him say that they cannot declare themselves a board of elections on steroids, George.
Okay, Mayor, we will talk more about this, but now we want to go to the Democratic leader of the Senate, likely to be the majority leader, Chuck Schumer.
Object to that free and fair election. They're in the minority. They will lose. They know that. They have no evidence of widespread voter fraud upon which to base their objections. That's because there is none. There is none. Not brought before any of the courts successfully. They know that President Trump and his allies have suffered a defeat in court after court across the country, losing no fewer than 62 legal challenges. And I might add, many Republican-appointed judges, some appointed by President Trump, rendered those decisions. They know, you all know, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be sworn in as President and Vice President of the United States on January 20th. But they are going to object to the counting of the vote anyway. And in the process, they will embarrass themselves, they will embarrass their party, and worst of all, they will embarrass their country. This insurrection was fortunately discouraged by the leadership of the majority party, but it was not quelled. It is a very sad comment on our times that merely accepting the results of an election is considered an act of political courage. Sadder and more dangerous still is the fact that an element of the Republican Party believes their political viability hinges on the endorsement of an attempted coup. That anyone, much less an elected official, would be willing to tarnish our democracy in order to burnish their personal political fortunes. Over the course of the afternoon, and however far into the evening this band of Republican objectors wants to take us, senators of goodwill from both sides of the aisle will explain why these challenges must be dismissed. The senators from states whose electoral votes are being challenged will explain how the allegations of fraud are baseless. And a substantial bipartisan majority must vote to put down these objections and defend the sanctity of our elections and indeed, our great and grand democracy. Because that's what we're talking about today. The health of our democracy. This wonderful, beautiful, grand democracy where the peaceful passing of the torch is extolled by school children in the second grade, but not by some here. As we speak, half of our voters are being conditioned by the outgoing president to believe that when his party loses an election, the results must not be legitimate. As we speak, the eyes of the world are on this chamber, questioning whether America is still the shining example of democracy, the shining city on the hill. What message we send today? What message will we send today to our people, to the world that has so looked up to us for centuries? What message will we send to fledgling democracies who study our Constitution, mirror our laws and traditions, in the hopes that they too can build a country ruled by the consent of the governed? What message will we send to those countries where democratic values are under assault and look to us to see if those values are still worth fighting for? What message will we send to every dark corner of the world where human rights are betrayed, elections are stolen, human dignity denied? What will we show those people? Will we show those people that there's a better way to ensure liberty and opportunity of humankind? Sadly, a small band of Republican objectors may darken the view of our democracy today, but a larger group of senators and House members from both sides of the aisle can send a message too. That democracy beats deep in the hearts of our citizens and our elected representatives, that we are a country of laws and of not men, that our traditions are not so easily discarded, even by our president, that facts matter, that truth matters, that while democracy allows free speech and free expression, even if that expression is anti-democratic, there will always, always be, praise God, a far broader and stronger coalition ready to push back and defend everything we hold dear. We can send that message today by voting in large and overwhelming numbers to defeat these objections. My colleagues, we each swore an oath just 3 days ago that we would defend and support the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that we would bear true faith and allegiance to the same. We swore that we took this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that we could well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office we were about to enter, so help us God. The precise words of that oath were shortly written after the Civil War, when the idea of true faith and allegiance to this country and its Constitution took on enormous meaning. Let those words ring in the ears of every senator today. Let us do our duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help us God.
Senator Schumer, Democratic leader of the Senate, soon likely to be majority leader of the Senate, echoing what we heard from Senator McConnell. That does not happen often at all. I want to bring in John Carl back on this. John, picking up what I was discussing with Mary, what a break there from Senator McConnell after 4 years, like Mike Pence, of loyalty at minimum to President Trump's agenda.
You know, Mitch McConnell was somebody who fought Trump's nomination, did not want to see him be the Republican nominee in 2016. But after he won that nomination, he's been among, you know, his most loyal supporters, at least of the Trump agenda. You know, it is Mitch McConnell that got his led the confirmations of Donald Trump's 3 Supreme Court nominations, stood there with him in whatever legislative accomplishments he had, including the tax cuts early on. But that was a stunning break, and it was a moment that I think harkens back to the Army McCarthy hearings when it was said to Joe McCarthy, "At long last, have you no sense of shame, sir?" He came right at this. It talked about the danger of this notion that Congress could overturn a presidential election, that baseless, made-up, conspiratorial allegations can be used to overturn a presidential election. And I thought most importantly, George, he talked about the notion of truth, that a democratic system of government depends on a shared commitment to truth. It's been said, I've made the argument that Donald Trump ultimately has waged a war on truth in the closing months of his presidency, if not before. And that was the argument that you heard from the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell.
John Carl, thank you. I want to bring in Heidi Heitkamp, who, of course, served in the Senate when she was a Democratic senator from North Dakota with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. And listening to both those speeches, Heidi, this is a remarkable moment, but you wonder, does it lay the groundwork for any possible cooperation going forward under the presidency of Joe Biden?
I think that Mitch McConnell did just an excellent job outlining his concern. And one of the comments that I think can't go without being emphasized is he said, "I will not stand by and let you believe that this vote is a harmless protest gesture." It's not. And I think that is a message to other people in his caucus who have not yet made a decision on what they're going to do, have been fairly quiet. He knows he's got 13 dissenters, but he wants to hold it to that if he's going to keep his caucus together going into the future. But I think that Mitch McConnell has always been an institutionalist. He's always been a believer that the Senate calms things down, that we at the Senate, I heard this over and over again, are the group that brings the kind of calm, sensible approach to it and cures the emotions. And you can tell in his voice, he's very emotional about this because he sees this not only as an assault on the Constitution, but also an assault on the Senate and the role that the Senate plays. But going forward, I think that the judgment will be there. It'll be a matter of whether his caucus is willing to cooperate. But clearly, I think today is a good day to try and find some common bipartisan ground in the United States Senate.
And it's coming, of course, on the day after those Senate elections in Georgia. I want to bring in Yvette Simpson on that. We saw Mitch McConnell, we saw Chuck Schumer. They're likely to be switching jobs in the coming weeks.
Yes, and I have to believe that that reality is part of the reason why we hear Mitch McConnell speaking the way that he has. I mean, I'm not willing to let him off the hook. The reality is, as Ram said, he created this monster, and we are literally at the last bastion of opportunity. Mitch McConnell Pence could not save this moment, and so I'm not surprised that at this moment they're putting down their flag. I think what I need to hear from them is to all of those people who are watching right now, marching, all of the Proud Boys last night who were wrestling with police officers, that this is your country, and guess what? You lost. Give up. This is a system, frankly, that has served this party for so long. They had no objection to the system when it was serving them. And now that it's not, now they want to take their bag and they want to go home. They want to fight against the system that, frankly, is finally not serving them. And I think what that says to Americans, what that says, and I want to speak for the black organizers and the black voters in all these states who organized and showed up, what that says is that you don't count. And I feel really emotional about this, George, today, because this system was set up as unequal, the Electoral College. And now today it was African-American voters in the South who delivered the blow to Republicans in this system. And I can't help but be emotional when I look at these people who are saying that those votes don't count. So I want Mitch McConnell, I want Pence to do more than what they're doing today. I want them to get on the loudspeaker and I want them to say to these people, go home. The system that we created, the system that served us, it failed. We didn't show up. We didn't win. Go home. Let's work together. Let's move forward. And unless I see that, I'm not going to be confident, George, that we're going to be able to work together. These House members and these senators, they're going to go forward, and they're going to continue to work. They're going to be running for re-election, some of them, and they're going to still be speaking to these people. I'm not confident that we're going to see the kind of change in them that we need. I'm hopeful. I'm always optimistic, but honestly, this is a sad, sad day in my heart for democracy, and I think for voters across this entire country. to see this.
The protests, thank you, Yvette. The protests are continuing in Washington. We're not really sure the scale of these protests, but we are getting reports now from the Capitol, as we said, of buildings being evacuated there. Rachel Scott, we're now the protesters who've been working their way down the ellipse are now approaching you on the Capitol.
They are, George, and just take a look behind me. You can see the sea of Trump supporters here. You're seeing some Trump flags, thousands of them behind me. You know, George, I was just in Georgia yesterday. I took the earliest flight out this morning. On my flight this morning was rows and rows of the president's supporters. They told me that they do not have faith in that election that just happened there in Georgia. You can see behind me as they're marching towards the Capitol here.
I think we lost Rachel's mic right there. I want to go to Ken Moten. You also have been on Constitution Avenue between the ellipse and the Capitol.
That's right, George. President Trump gave his supporters their marching orders, and that's what they're doing. They're marching from the ellipse all the way down Constitution right now. Take a look behind me, George. A sea of Trump supporters who are here with their flags, as Rachel was saying. They're also chanting, "Stop the steal," 4 more years. We have gotten word that the president may join them. We don't know if that's going to be the case, especially with the security concerns we're seeing right now, with some of the evacuations we've seen. We can tell you that what we have seen here from even our point and our vantage point from Constitution, that people have been mostly calm. Yes, some of the rhetoric pretty intense, especially after the developments overnight in Georgia, after the president fired these people up just more than an hour ago, and as they've been marching, George, this line of people has not stopped. We know that tens of thousands of people are here. There were 30,000 people who were expected to be here, but the numbers we've seen here, the intensity in which these folks are talking about the fact that they believe that the president can still be the president, that he has other avenues that he can continue fighting. We know that's not going to be the case. They truly believe that. I asked people who are from Staten Island, from Dallas, from Detroit, if they believe that President Trump will still be the president after January 20th. They say that he still has a chance. We know that is not the case, but as you hear these folks chanting, going down Constitution Avenue toward the Capitol, they're fired up, George. Again, things here are calm, but D.C. is pretty much on lockdown. The streets around this area in downtown, they are closed. The National Guard has been mobilized. Every single city police officer is on duty right now, because we know that when the sun goes down, there's a potential likelihood for violence. We saw it during a rally in a march December 12th as organized by this same Women for America First group. They're trying here in D.C. to keep violence from happening, and so they've got pretty much the entire National Guard and the entire police department mobilized to make sure they keep things here calm, George.
As you said, Kenneth, most of the protesters have been peaceful. We've also learned that at the Capitol, just around 1 o'clock, some of the barricades were breached by several of the protesters. Pierre Thomas, give us the latest on that.
So that's the case, George, that there is some concern that some of the protesters have become too close to the Capitol, and we also have some more detail about what is causing a lot of the commotion over at the Capitol. The Capitol Police and ATF are on the scene, George, investigating a suspicious item close to the RNC headquarters on 1st Street Southeast near the U.S. Capitol. So officials are trying to check out that item. That's not unusual to have suspicious items. There's some concern that this could be some kind of pipe bomb that's being looked into. We do not know if that's going to be the case, but that is causing some of the commotion, George. Also, law enforcement officials are just concerned that the crowd, as we have noted, which has been largely peaceful, that they do not get too close to some of the barriers that they have constructed and, get too close to the Capitol. This is the situation that's unfolding, George. Again, very tense.
How concerned are officials about tonight, Pierre?
The main concern is a repeat of what we saw earlier this month, in December after the election, where the rallies, stragglers, it only takes a small number of people, George, to do things and acts of violence. In that case, George, we saw some members of the Proud Boys, alleged members of the Proud Boys, go near some African-American churches, burn some of the Black Lives Matter flags down. And police know that those situations can turn violent very quickly. That's the concern tonight. Again, the hope is that this largely peaceful crowd will remain that way, but again, the concern is that you might have stragglers, extremists of any sort who just want to see some kind of melee today, George.
Okay, Pierre, thanks very much. Cecilia Vega, let me bring you in on this. As we see these crowds that were incited by the president, as Mitch McConnell said, incited without evidence. The president back in the White House right now, symbolic as well of the last several weeks since the election. His inner circle has frayed in the weeks since the election. He is down to the hardest of the hardcore supporters, both in the streets and inside the White House.
He is listening, George, I say this frankly and matter-of-factly, to conspiracy theorists. He is leaning in on those conspiracy theories, and he is listening and absorbing and, frankly, becoming delusional about fringe thought, and that is where he is. And, you know, there's been an interesting note, a change from the White House. Normally, you sort of get these schedules that the president is doing every day from inside the White House, and it lists, you know, he's got a lunch with whomever, he's got an event with whatever. Lately, the schedule has been blank. There's not been much on it at all. And there is a little paragraph on the bottom that says, the president is working very hard on behalf of the American people, and he will be making phone calls from sunrise to sunset. He's not been doing a lot, George. We know from sources who are close to the president that he has been fixated for weeks since Election Day, essentially, on his loss, a loss that he has not accepted to this day, still does not accept. This in the middle, of course, of during a global pandemic that is very much on the back burner for him. We've heard him speak very little about that as the economy has been in shambles, as Congress struggled to pass this stimulus bill that he was largely absent on. And you know, so many people ask, why would these Republicans be doing this? Why would they be staging these challenges? And I've got to tell you, George, the Republicans that I've spoken to on Capitol Hill, so many of them were fearful of the wrath of Donald Trump, this wrath that we see him now sort of laying out for his own vice president, his loyal vice president. They felt that he would go after him. So that's why it was so completely stunning to see what Mitch McConnell did today. And the sources that I'm talking to tell me, who are close to Mitch McConnell, say that he went into that chamber today. There was no fear. There were no concerns about the wrath of Donald Trump. That the words, the speech that he gave came from the heart, because he was very concerned to his core about this message that he felt he needed to send today. And I can bet that it is a matter of minutes, if not hours, that Donald Trump starts to lay his wrath out on some of these Republicans, including Mitch McConnell. And we're starting to see this split, as John's been laying out, this split in the Republican Party, that they're willing to take on the party of Trump right now.
Thank you, Cecilia. I want to bring in Mary Bruce. Mary, the ironies are piling upon the ironies here. Well, 5 years ago this month, Mitch McConnell took to the Senate floor and said Merrick Garland, D.C. Appeals Court judge, would not be, his nomination by President Obama to the Supreme Court would not even be considered by the Senate. As the results were coming in this morning from Georgia, as he learned that he's no longer be Senate Republican leader, we learned that President-elect Joe Biden is nominating Merrick Garland to be Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah, it is really sort of a remarkable bookend here, shall we say, for Mitch McConnell. After fighting tooth and nail to oppose that nomination, now learning that Joe Biden will, of course, is going to nominate him to be his attorney general. And since it does look likely that the Democrats will take control of the Senate, that, of course, is yet another nomination that will likely be able to push through with quite ease, given that it does seem that Democrats will have that control. It is just a really astounding turn of events. And, George, we should say we are also now hearing on the Senate floor from some of those Republican lawmakers who are objecting to these results, responding to the chastising that they just received from Republican leader Mitch McConnell. Ted Cruz just gave a lengthy speech trying to defend his actions, arguing essentially that the allegations are too much to ignore, that they owe it to those Americans who believe in these allegations of fraud, that they have to take these steps. But these are, of course, allegations that President Trump and his supporters have spread, allegations that have been shown repeatedly in state after state to have no merit. And Ted Cruz and the other Republicans who are objecting to these results still have not put forth any evidence of widespread fraud. So we are getting a sense now of what we are going to see play out over the next several hours as Republicans come forward to do as the president has requested and object to these results.
Thank you, Mary. Terry Moran, Merrick Garland, former prosecutor, prosecuted the Oklahoma City bombing back in 1995. Also, federal appeals court judge, is going to face a wide range of issues, restoring faith in the Justice Department to begin with, but also getting pressure from many Democrats, many progressives, to consider prosecuting President Trump, especially in the wake of this phone call, which they say was evidence of tampering with the election, a clear abuse of power.
That's right, and that'll be a decision ultimately for President Biden. Look, President Gerald Ford faced a similar decision when on tape there was strong evidence of Richard Nixon engaging in a conspiracy to obstruct justice and other crimes. And Ford thought, for the good of the country, after the trauma of the resignation of Richard Nixon, he should pardon Nixon, a full, free pardon for any crimes he might have committed. It was a blanket pardon for any crimes he might have committed while in office. Ford probably lost re-election because of that. This is a somewhat different situation, but does Joe Biden really want to spend that much political capital on investigating the alleged crimes of Donald Trump, also on tape? Remember, there are state officials that have responsibility here. There's a section of the Georgia State Code which prohibits conspiring to commit election fraud, and there are people who say that phone call is evidence that Donald Trump engaged in it. But I also want to say, I think that Joe Biden is going to look towards a different time, and what we heard from Mitch McConnell, as you've been saying, and Mike Pence, opens the door to a new era. These are two staunch Trump loyalists who it seems really stopped this for once and for all. And it is a little alarming that it came down to the patriotism of two people. We will praise them, and have, but we don't know the names of the people who really forced their hand. And those are the countless neighbors in every town in the country who counted the votes, who were at the election polling stations watching it, who were the election observers, and who were the responsible official at the local, county, and state levels who certified these votes that will put Joe Biden in office. The democracy held not because of the courage of Mike Pence or Mitch McConnell, but because of ordinary Americans who did their duty under the Constitution.
During a pandemic, it should be underscored. Let me bring in Dan Abrams for this as well. We've seen a slew of pardons for President Trump, from President Trump for his closest associates, those caught up in the Russia investigation in the last several weeks. Some have raised the question, can he preemptively pardon himself?
Yeah, and that remains an open question. I think most people believe that if he were to do it, and it were to be challenged, there would be a serious challenge to it, because that's not what the framers had intended with regard to a pardon. But there does seem to be ambiguity around that. Now, I think the point that Terry made is the most important one here, which is I think that too many people are focusing on the federal side of this. Merrick Garland, remember, Merrick Garland was considered a political moderate. This is not going to be someone who's going to be hailed by the left of the Democratic Party. But that's a very different question from the broader one of what happens to Donald Trump now. And I think that what is happening in New York, for example, is of real danger to Donald Trump legally. The investigation from Cyrus Vance, the district attorney there in New York, is very serious. It is ongoing. It is increasing. And so when one talks about sort of Donald Trump's legal future, you can't pardon against a state crime. And as a result, I think that's where the focus really needs to be.
Dan Abrams, thanks very much. Want to go back to Rachel Scott on the Capitol. What more are we seeing now? Some reports that the protesters are getting closer to the Capitol steps. Apparently, we lost her microphone again. Let's go back to Georgia right now, because we have been talking about these special elections. Raphael Warnock, we project, has been elected senator, the first black senator from the state of Georgia, first black Democrat from the South. And John Ossoff, the Democrat, is leading David Perdue now with about 98% of the vote in. Steve Osunsami in Atlanta.
George, you know, they are still counting some of these votes that are outstanding. There are about 60,000 outstanding votes. But one interesting note, this came from Gabriel Sterling in the Secretary of State's office. He has come out saying that when you look at where the outstanding votes are coming from, that he believes that John Ossoff will not only maintain his current lead, but also extend his lead outside that sort of margin that you need to be able to ask for a recount in the state of Georgia. Ossoff has already declared himself the winner in this race. Neither of the Republicans have offered any sort of concession. As you mentioned, this is a historic race, what happened here. I'm standing right now at Ebenezer Baptist Church in front of the new building. This is the church that Reverend Warnock is the pastor of and has said that he will remain pastor of this church. Across the street is the old Ebenezer Baptist Church. You know, there was someone who had mentioned earlier about the black vote and how significant it was in this race. It absolutely was significant, and Warnock's position had a lot to do with it. Across the street is Martin Luther King's burial site. He and his wife are buried across the street from me. This church was his church. He was senior pastor of this church, and one of the things that we saw in this campaign was an attack from the right on the black church, many people felt. I will say that Republicans in this state are now pointing fingers at the president. The Secretary of State's office, when asked this morning about whether or not the president had any role in the defeat of, for sure, what it's looking like one of the candidates, possibly a second, quote, the president of the United States is 100% foursquare responsible, with a little added assist from Doug Collins, who decided to run in that state jungle primary, which helped split the party. When you tell people your vote didn't count, this is all part of a crazy town, and people are stealing things. You undermine people's confidence in the vote. Then you create a civil war within the GOP at a time when the GOP probably wanted to unite their vote to turn out. Those are the kind of things that the president is solely responsible for doing. That is coming from a Republican and a Trump supporter. That is the state of affairs here in Georgia within the Republican Party after this election.
Recrimination is just beginning right there. Tom Yama's here with me. And Tom, why don't you show what Steve was talking about there, where we expect this new vote to come in?
Right. So Steve Osunsami just said there's 60,000 votes that they're still waiting to count. It's important to show where these votes are coming from. They're coming from big Democratic counties here around the Atlanta metro region, along with Chatham County, which is Savannah as well. Now, we heard that election official saying that the trend lines are favoring Jon Ossoff. He's up by 17,000 votes, but I want to show you the margins in some of these counties. Places like DeKalb County, when we see where the margins are at right now, 83%, Jon Ossoff on top. These are the kind of counties where they're still waiting on some votes. Places like Henry County as well, 61% of the vote there. And Chatham, again, very Democratic county, 59% of the vote. I do want to make one more point, George, before I send it back to you. That election official who's saying the trend lines are favoring Jon Ossoff, he's a Republican election official in Georgia. There's nothing strange about this. He's being honest with the way the votes are going, the way the trend lines are going. We're still going to wait for about maybe 10,000 more military provisional ballots, people who live overseas. But right now, Democrats are feeling very comfortable with where this race is. And again, if Jon Ossoff pulls this off, as you know, George, Democrats will have the power in the Senate.
And what's significant, he could be outside the margin of the recount, as Steve was saying.
That's right, and it could be game over. If he gets enough votes, it'll be under that half percentage point, or I should say above that half percentage point. No recount. Both senators from Georgia, now Democrats.
Okay, Tom, thanks very much. I want to try, do we have Rachel Scott right now as the protesters are approaching the Capitol? Rachel, are we connected right now? What are you seeing?
George, as
over there by the Capitol. As you know, they were all over there by the White House watching the president speak. We're hearing cheers right now as they climb up the steps of the Capitol. Trump supporters on telling them to keep going here. All the people out here, thousands, as far as the eye can see. We're seeing this stretch for blocks now. They are here to stand the president. They say that they do not accept the results of this election. I've met people from as far as Florida, Georgia, Kentucky. And what is interesting, George, is that they were not listening to anything that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was saying there inside of the Capitol. They have not been hearing any of the statements coming from the vice president, but I can tell you that they were hanging on to every single word that President Trump was saying. I talked to one man who said he just wants the truth. Well, the truth is that the president lost this election. I asked him, when he will believe that? He said when the president says it himself, George.
There you hear the chants. Which truth is that? Not accepting the reality right there. Pierre Thomas, we know the Capitol Police are engaged. We know the D.C. Police are engaged. We know the National Guard has been called out. Set the scene for what they're expecting the rest of the day and this evening.
George, we're getting some more details about what is happening now as well. The Capitol is moving toward a lockdown. Two of our reporters on Capitol Hill, producers on Capitol Hill, say they can be heard overhear. They can overhear announcements telling people to stay away from windows. A law enforcement official called me to tell me that they're looking at a potential suspicious device near the Capitol Power Plant. That's at the 300 block of First Street, and the possibility of another device, possibility again, George, of another device near the DNC. Again, until law enforcement officials can figure out exactly what these devices are or are not, they are moving toward extreme caution and moving toward a lockdown on the Capitol Hill, George. And again, they need to clear this up before they can get things settled back down. But that's what is causing a lot of the commotion. Two potential devices found near the Capitol. They're trying to see if these are actually a threat of any kind or hoaxes. But again, in a situation like this, they need to firm up exactly what they're dealing with, keep people in place until they can get this situation more under control.
And there you see the protesters on the Capitol steps. They are on the Capitol steps inside the Capitol, of course, both the House and the Senate, debating these objections to the seating of the electoral votes from the state of Arizona. We expect several more objections to other states, including perhaps Georgia and Pennsylvania, others on the table as well. Again, the outcome is not in question. Joe Biden has been elected. He will take office on January 20th when he's inaugurated next president of the United States. The objections will be voted down by the House and the Senate later today. But these protesters want to be heard on this remarkable day in Washington. President Trump inside the White House after rallying the protesters earlier today on the ellipse, after speaking to them, saying to put pressure on Mike Pence, saying that this election has been rigged, repeating his false claims that were rebuked by the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor just moments ago. The president now sitting inside the White House, no doubt watching this on television play out in his final 14 days in office. On the network, we're going to turn to our regular programming. Coverage of this will continue on ABC News Live, and of course, a full report tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir. Have a good afternoon.
This has been a special report. ABC News.
From ABC 7, this is Midday Live.
And good morning. On a little late today because of all that is happening in Washington, D.C. Those remarkable images, Kristen, of people basically trying to storm